I'm going to make some noise on here so we can get started. All right.
And lots of chairs down here.
There's no chairs in here, yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Jesse Berlin. I'm the president of the Cognitive Science and Artificial Intelligence Student Association. And we, along with University College and the Cognitive Science program at U of T, would like to welcome you to the first of what will hopefully be a new and interesting lecture series called the Mutual Relevance Lecture Series. What we're trying to do with this is sort of getting two professors up from at least nominally different fields to talk about an issue that's relevant to cognitive science. Sort of, trying to be somewhere on the spectrum between a discussion and a debate. Today we have Dr. John Vervaeke from the Department of Psychology and the Cognitive Science and Buddhism in Psychology and Mental Health programs, and Dr. Cantwell Smith from the Faculty of Information and the Departments of Philosophy and Computer Science, today to discuss the issue of whether or not consciousness is representational. And I can dig into the issue a little bit more, but I think that I might misrepresent one or both of their positions on it. So we'll just leave it.
You're arguing that it is, right?
All right. So the way this is going to work is that to start, each of them are going to have 5 to 10 minutes to discuss some sort of introductory points, uninterrupted, for them to bring to this discussion. And then we'll have, after both of them go, we'll have a period of sort of uninterrupted discussion time between the two of them. Half an hour until the end, we're going to start taking questions from the audience to further spur on the discussion. And to decide who goes first, I'm just going to flip this coin right here. Who wants to take heads?
I'll take heads.
John takes heads. Okay. I can't flip coins. Heads. Okay, John. You're up.
Thank you. All right. I don't know if I want to use this. I don't think I want to. It sounds too imposing. All right. So, is consciousness representational? I want to try and limit this discussion in some ways. As many of you know, if you open the title of consciousness up, especially philosophically, you get something that's even greater than Minon's jungle ontologically. I want to talk about what it is to be a mental representation versus just being information. The problem with information is that it occurs whenever any two things are covarying in a reliable way, and that if we would extend the notion of representation to any kind of informational covariance, we're going to have mental representation everywhere. So let's restrict the notion of mental representation to information that has been processed for cognitive function. And what I mean by a cognitive function is it's processed for doing problem solving and goal seeking. And that means we're talking about the usual things: categorization, memory, problem formulation, communication. And all of those, as you know, I've argued elsewhere, presuppose relevance realization, because there's a combinatorial explosion of informational relations. So what that means then is representation itself presupposes relevance realization, because it's relevance realization that turns information into representation. And this is convergent with an aspectuality argument. All representations are aspectual by nature. We do not represent all of the properties, but only a selected subset, how they are relevant to each other and how they are relevant to us. And that means, then again, that insofar as representations are aspectual, they presuppose relevance realization, which means then, of course, that one of the things that relevance realization can't be built out of are representations, on pain of a circular explanation. So, relevance realization can ultimately be representational in nature. I've argued elsewhere that I think it's something analogous to evolutionary fittedness between an organism and its environment. Namely, the brain is dynamically coupled to the world in such a way that it is constantly evolving its fittedness for solving problems, and perhaps that constitutes intelligence. I think this is convergent with some arguments that are emerging in neuroscience of what turns a non-conscious state into a conscious state, what turns non-conscious information processing into conscious processing. All of them seem to zero in on issues of relevance realization. This is clearly the case in the global workspace model. Bars and Shanahan, in which they clearly indicate that what the global workspace is doing is solving the frame problem or the relevance problem. It clearly relates also to a related concept, working memory, and Lynn Hasher's notion of working memory, which I think is going to be the one that wins out in psychology, is that working memory is a higher order relevance filter. Notice that this has a very interesting way of connecting two things. If working memory is about relevance realization, which is about intelligence, and working memory is highly associated with consciousness, it would help to explain why we have intuitive connections between our attributions of intelligence of an organism and our attributions of consciousness. In addition, Barr and Seth, with their work, their notion of the prefrontal cortex responsible for consciousness, they talk about chunking and things like that, which again involve relevance realization. Tononi's integrated information theory, the same thing. Not technically in the formal presentation of the theory, but when he offers his tests for whether or not a machine has consciousness, they are tests for the appropriateness, the relevance to the context, etc., which are tests for relevance realization. And Clearman's radical plasticity hypothesis is also the same thing, because he says what distinguishes non-conscious information processing from conscious information processing is that the processor somehow cares about the information, finds it important or relevant to itself. So what I'm saying, therefore, is that what we have is the idea that what is going on is the following picture. We have non-representational information that is being processed by relevance realization, which is a non-representational process, into representations. Those representations are then again processed by a higher order form of relevance realization in perhaps working memory, and that is what turns them into conscious states. If that's the case, or something like that is the case, then we could decompose consciousness in the following way. Consciousness decomposes into the non-representational processing of representations. That's the higher order relevance realization. And those representations themselves decompose into the non-representational processing of information, which is itself non-representational in nature, which would mean we would have completely decomposed via relevance realization consciousness into non-representational processing. I think this can do a lot of important work for us, and in particular what it can do is explain phenomena that are not well explained by representational theories of consciousness. One of the things that this model could afford an explanation of is a state that is arrived at in deep meditative practice. It's been reported by Foreman and others. And many different meditative traditions give very convergent descriptions of this state. It's known as the pure consciousness event. Not to give you an argument by authority, but just to state my position. I've experienced this myself. This is a state in deep meditation where you're not conscious of anything. You're not conscious of any aspect of the world. You're not conscious of a sensation. You're not even conscious of being conscious. You are conscious. That's why it's called a pure consciousness event. You merely are instantiating consciousness. You do not blank out. You do not pass out. You remain in some sense, but you do not remain as a self in any sense. And what's interesting about this is that this notion that I've given you could help explain the pure consciousness event. Perhaps in the pure consciousness event is that the recursive relevance realization has become pure recursive relevance realization. The only thing that the relevance realization is finding relevant is the process of relevant realization. That's all that it is. And that would be very cool because it would indicate that there are states of consciousness in which the relevance realization that seems to be fundamental to making us both cognitive and conscious entities exist without there being any representational content, but that not invoking any deep explanatory mystery. So, I think one of the cool things also about what I'm proposing is that the pure consciousness event can be explained in terms of relevance realization because some of the properties that persist in the pure consciousness event is experienced as you're still here. There's a here-ness, a now-ness, it's sort of presence. There's a presencing still. There's a unity to this. And all of these things can be explained in terms of relevance realization. The unity goes towards the way relevance realization binds information together. The here-ness is, again, the fact that the information is temporally being processed as relevant. Sorry, that's the nounness. The here-ness is that relevance is that information is always relevant to the information processor. And also the sort of power, the sense of ultimacy of the pure consciousness event could be explained by the fact that consciousness is coming to confront the combinatorial explosion of the information that's available to it. But none of that information is being grasped representationally, so although it is experienced as a kind of fullness and ultimacy, it's also grasped as a no-thingness, which is a classic way of describing the pure consciousness event. So, what I'm proposing to you then is that if we take a close look, we can see perhaps consciousness as not a higher order representation phenomena, but a higher order relevance realization phenomena that would ultimately make it fundamentally non-representational in nature. That would explain the pure consciousness event itself, its possibility, and some of its determining characteristics. So we would have both a conceptual and an empirical-based argument for consciousness being non-representational. Thank you.
Thanks, John. And thank you all. Jesse and the other people who organized this also. I've been really looking forward to this event. It arose, I believe, out of a conversation in Minds and Machines, which I teach, in which there are lots of students in that class who talk very admiringly about John, about his views. There's this notion of relevance realization that apparently John believes in. I actually confess I don't quite know what it is. I struggle, but I'm not aware of that yet. So I dare say we're going to get there. But anyway, I haven't interacted with John a lot. I interact sort of indirectly with him through all of these students who are his fans. And I've been thrilled that he's part of this program and his permanent job that psychology has provided and so on and so forth. And in a way, to put it, I'm conscious of how much he's contributed to this program. So, and that's, of course, the point that I want to argue. Now, I think... So look, I think we're physical creatures, and the physicality of us as creatures is going to matter a lot to what I say. I think we're, if you got rid of all the atoms, I don't think we'd be here anymore. But here's the thing about physics, which is physics is local at the sort of lumbering mesoscale kind of level of abstraction at which we're physical. Everything is local. 1 over r squared rules from your physics class, if you remember, time and space. Everything is local. And that means that we can't interact with the world to do a lot of stuff that, in fact, you might think we often do. Like, for example, you can't access the past. You can't interact with the past. So therefore, if you're going to remember the past, you've got to remember it some other way than interacting with it. So it can't be, as it were, dynamic embodied engagement. Similarly, the future, you can't engage with the future. Not right now, at least. In the future, you will. But if you're going to plan whether you should cross Bloor Street and there's a semi coming down the road at 100 miles an hour, you can't interact with that future where you're creamed. You've actually got to think, oh goodness, I'm going to get creamed if I cross Bloor Street. And so Popper has this wonderful phrase, we think so our hypotheses can die in our stead. And I think there's something deep about that. So Maturana and Varela talk about the structural coupling. But the thing about structural coupling is that if they're serious about us being physical creatures, all you can structurally couple with is the instantaneous moment right now with things that are actually within the causal envelope. And my sense is that's not what I'm conscious of. So I'm conscious of Jesse here. Now all I can couple with Jesse here is the laminar surface of the front of him, off of which electromagnetic waves are in fact radiating. But I actually wasn't thinking about the laminar surface of Jesse over here, only which part of which I can see. I was thinking about Jesse, the full-blooded, whole person that's got a head behind that face, and ethically worthy, and so on and so forth. And you all, the audience here. I mean, if you believe the psychologists, my eyes are darting all over the place. At any moment, I've seen basically hardly any of you, and so on and so forth. But what I'm conscious of is the room is full, and not only that, they put glass here in the front so that when I cause you to despair, you won't leap. So, my sense is the only way to be compatible with physicalism and have a grasp of the world is you have to represent it, because you can't engage with it, because the world isn't world in terms of that which you can couple with. And how do you engage with it? You have mental representation. Now, by mental representation, I may not mean the same thing as John, and we will perhaps get to that too. I take sort of, in a way, Hoagland's representational genera paper as representation is something that, if you like, carries information, although I don't think it has to be true, but that plays a causal role in the absence of the ability for that which it represents to play a causal role. So I can represent the fact there's a floor out there because I can't engage with the floor out there because I can't see it. But I think there is a floor out there, and if there is a floor out there, and I think there's a floor out there, but I can't engage with the floor out there in order to think it, then I must in fact be using something that has the content that there's a floor out there, which isn't the floor. And that, I think, is basically the characterization of what representation is and what it's for, which is it enables us to grasp that which is beyond our immediate company. Okay, so 5 things, quickly. First, I do think consciousness is consciousness of, and actually, oddly enough, not when I lived in Rochdale, but sometime after that, I actually was involved in much more strict meditative practices than I am now, and I think I have experienced, now I don't know if it's pure, I don't want to pretend, I don't want to arrogate to myself that I had the same experience you did, but my sense is, though, that even intense meditative experiences, stopping the world, losing self, recognizing that the sort of ordinary furniture of the world is quite friable and perhaps illusory, those actually aren't non-representational. You can shut down the dialogue in your head, you can not focus on objects, you can lose the self, and so on and so forth. But my sense is it's still experiential, and experience is of. So I think you have to have the ofness there even in those states. So I actually suspect if I were to put money at the moment on the place that John and I disagree most, it's going to be on the word of. Secondly, I want to make a distinction between personal and subpersonal. You know, personal is, and there's a huge amount of confusion in Cog Sci about this, I think, and John McDowell was fabulous in diagnosing Dennett's complete misunderstanding of Gibson in this, for anyone who wants to pursue this stuff. Personally, it's the whole person, that what is true of us as a whole, what's blameworthy, for example, who it is that I care about, and so on and so forth, right? If you are 3, yeah, that's right. I only got 4 more points, so 47 seconds each. The representational theory of mind is not a theory about what we do as persons. It's a theory of how it is that we do the things that we do as persons, which is that we're constituted of representations inside. And I'm actually not going to spend a lot of time on that, but I do think as people, we register the world. I want to use that word. It's sort of like representation. It's aspectual, as John said, but we take the world to be intelligible. That's really what matters. So I don't think there's a lot of heads in here. I think there's a lot of people, because it's intelligible to me that there are a lot of people. But again, I'm not receiving evidence there's people. I'm only receiving evidence that there's some heads and some about to jump. So the registering, I think, again, the only way for that to be compatible with physicalism is that, in fact, we have internal representations that fill the picture out. Qualia. Here, I think, we run it like, you probably know this word, right? It's the sort of richness, the inexorable sort of presence of the notion of consciousness such that there's something it's like to be like that. A lot of people take this as an indictment of representation, and I think they are doing that because of the hardest problem in cognitive science, which has to do with the ontology of the world, what the world actually consists in. When we register it, the way you register it in philosophy, you think it consists of objects and properties. That's an extraordinary abstraction. You got to box the world on its ears, and you got to ignore all kinds of stuff, and so on and so forth. You package up in these parcels and label them like for UPS and all this kind of stuff, and you end up with an impoverished picture of the world. One of the things that's true about experience, consciousness, and stuff, it's much denser and richer than that. But that doesn't mean it's not representational. It means that representation doesn't have to represent things in terms of that kind of ontology. And I think once you let go of that conceit, and you recognize that if we're going to explain the ofness of consciousness, we have to explain what the world is like, so that we can explain what we actually take the world to be like when we're conscious of it. So in other words, don't extract yourself from this classical impoverished view of the world by trying to go inside and construct something else in there. I think we have to take the world to be the locus of what we need to understand better. And also, I'm basically going to close with that. I think once you can do that, and you take serious our being physical creatures, You realize that in order for things in the world to exist for you as in the world, you have to deal with that with representation. And I think that's what we care about. I don't think creatures care about information. If you tell me my kid has been hit and is in St. Mike's and is in the second floor in the emergency room and so on and so forth, I don't say, oh, that's such a valuable piece of information. I care about the kid. And I get into a taxi and go there. The caring to me is in the world, and the world is that which representation allows me to actually be directed towards. And that's my worry. If we don't talk about these representation semantic things, we won't have a world.
Oh, okay.
You can stay here so we can...
Oh, sure. Okay, great. First of all, I wasn't going to deny any of the arguments Brian made about the necessity for representation to be in relation to things displaced in time and space. That goes without question, I think. The issue is whether or not that's, and I also don't dispute the fact that our conscious states are often also representational. I'm not disputing that either. The question is whether its representations are constitutive of consciousness. That's the crucial issue. And we know that representations themselves are not qua-representations sufficient for consciousness, because I take it we can agree upon all the post-Freudian stuff about all the non-conscious representations we have, is that put us into contact with things displaced in time and space and let us interact with them intelligently without consciousness existing. So I concede that all that machinery can be in place, and I think we have very clear evidence that while it's in place, we don't have consciousness. So I think it's, in an important sense, irrelevant. What's relevant is what turns those things into consciousness, and what I'm arguing turns them into consciousness, and what turns information into representation. I also agree with you that we don't care about information, we care about representation, and I think the caring is exactly the issue. It's the caring that turns the information into representation, and it's the higher order caring that turns the representations into conscious states. And as I've tried to argue, that's a species of relevance realization, and relevance realization on pain of circularity can't be explained by a representation. And so while I agree with everything you say, I think it doesn't lead to the conclusion that consciousness is inherently representational.
So, obviously, I don't think we care about representations either. It's not the information or representation or anything, as it were, inside. What I care about is somebody who's not here. I look out and, oh goodness, they're not here. And I'm really worried. They had an appointment with the surgeon this morning, and if they're not here, maybe there's some trouble. So that's displaced, right? Mm-hmm. The thing that's interesting to me about that displacement is that if I care or think about, the other thing and so on, one of the things that I think is really a kind of grand thing going on in cognitive science at the moment is that those semantic relations, as I'm going to call them, aren't causal relations that you can see in a video camera. You can't pick up a reference relation. If you put a huge 10-meter thick block of lead between here and St. Mike's, and I'm still thinking about the between St. Mike's, the block of lead can't stop the reference relation getting to St. Mike's. These are amazing. They're physical. We're a physical world. I'm not denying that. But the thing that's interesting about these semantic relations to the world, and the fact that the caring is to the world, to me, is the caring is not restricted to things that a science can see. And that's part of my concern, is how is it that we get outside the head and think, is anybody out there, right? The sort of meant to be the sort of first sign of consciousness or something like this, right? You can imagine amoebas in the swamp or something, right?
Sure.
A little cartoon, right? And they all kind of self-organize and so on and so forth. They went to the Santa Fe Institute for summer school and they kind of self-organized. And then they start getting conscious. One of the things
You tell better jokes than me.
Yeah, you have to be unconscious to do that. And you say, what's out there? That seems to me, that orientation towards that which is more, that's something that I think is pretty profound and pretty characteristic of mind. Okay. So I guess the question is, okay, so I want to put a gauntlet to you, but I want to pick up one you threw.
Sure.
My gauntlet to you is, how do you get there to be a world for a conscious creature? Because I think conscious creatures are, as it were, able to care about the world. I had a graduate student got a PhD in computer science, a brilliant guy who you actually know. His name was Jun Lo. I mean, some of you know, right? He used to teach.
Of course I know John.
You know Jun. He was doing a PhD in computer science. He was building embodied robotics, and he came to me once in his office, in my office, and he said, "Look, I'm building these creatures, and these creatures are in the world. I want to build a robot for whom there is a world." And I said, "Well, you better get a PhD in philosophy." So that sense of orientation outwards, I think that's really an issue. Now, let's go back to your saying.
I just want to know that. Okay, I'll into it now. Go ahead, please.
You're saying that you can have representational states without consciousness.
Yeah.
Think of the vestibular ocular reflex, right? So you know this thing that if you rotate your head, your eyes have circuitry in them that cause your eyes to rotate the opposite direction, so you stay focused. And if you rotate your head and really work hard to not let the muscles go, everything goes blurry. It's actually pretty hard to do. My sense is, and if we do this, and just as we're going by, the provost walks by, they're going to worry about what we're doing in cognitive science. But anyway, think about, though, letting your eyes go back into corresponding motion in the other direction, and the thing snaps into view. There's a sense that the world snaps into place as world. And my sense, I guess, of what I think of as constitutive of consciousness is a kind of deference to the world as a whole, that's actually out there, and it's entire, and that there isn't anywhere outside the world, and that when the world and I disagree, the world wins. I mean, and that sort of cohesive, sense of being, as it were, thrown, to get a little Heideggerian, into the world, that seems to me this sort of snap into being awake in a certain sense. So you know the truck driver phenomenon. This is a technical terminology in philosophy. Truck driver phenomenon is you're terribly tired and you're driving home and you're just, I don't know how you're going to make it and stuff, and then you just sort of whatever, and then suddenly you're in front of your house. And you think, oh my God, the last time I was aware of anything, I was on 401. How did I get here? I must have been unconscious. Well, we have a videotape because everything's surveyed, right? So we just go to Google. And you actually came up to red lights, you stopped, cars went by you, you passed them and stuff. So you were aware in some sense. But you were in a certain sense unconscious. And I think my sense is in that truck driver phenomenon, it was not unlike the things you're talking about before I kind of noticed, that look, you're governed by representation. But my sense is that you don't have this orientation to the world as a whole, this sort of deference to the world as an entirety. But if you wake up, it's, oh my goodness, this is where whatever, it all ties together, and there's this sort of coalescing into coherence of that towards which you're oriented. So that's why, for me, that sense of the world snapping into focus and being world such that you can defer to it, that's, it seems to me, constitutive of consciousness, and it's why I'm interested in how you get orientation towards that which is larger.
Okay, so let me respond first, and then I'll try and answer your question. So in the truck driver phenomena, you're agreeing that there is an orientation outward, because the truck driver was responding to the stop sign and the crossroads and all kinds of things like that. But what's lacking in those representational states that constitutes consciousness is it's snapping together into a coherent world. But the problem I then have with that is that coherent world is precisely what seems to be non-controversially lacking in the pure consciousness event. And that is not present in any way. You might be able to argue some vague consciousness of consciousness, but the orientation to a world as a snapped together whole is precisely what is consistently denied in the pure consciousness event. So that would strike me as problematic for what you're saying. Now, you asked me to respond to both. So
yeah, no, go ahead. I'm just making a note.
Oh, okay. So you seem to be caught up between.
It's soon going to be in the past, and I won't be able to get. The problem with the orientation outward is whether or not you think it's decomposable into more primitive ideas.
Whether or not, for example, you think the paramecium, to use one of Thompson's favorite example, is oriented outward on the sucrose as food. And that seems to be the case, and there's even a degree of aspectualization going on there. It seems difficult to conceive of that as anything like a mental representation. It seems to correspond more closely to what we're both agreeing is information, and yet nevertheless you have the orientation outward precisely because living things seem to be constituted by the fact that they seek those conditions that promote their existence, which seems to be an orientation beyond themselves, an orientation outside of themselves. Now, it's not what you said, an orientation to a full snap-together world, but I've already sort of challenged whether or not that's constitutive of consciousness. So I think it's possible to get that orientation going in terms of this very primitive problem-solving, this coupling to the world that aspectualizes things. But like many people, DePaulo and myself, I think that process ultimately requires some selectivity on the part of the organism, some ability to select this information rather than the other, and you have very primitive kinds of relevance realization going on. So I think you have the primitive beginnings in orientation of the very relevance realization that I think gets ramped up into full-blown consciousness. Because look, like if I have a blind sight person, which would be another something similar to the highway hypnotism, that's navigating around in the world, right? They can sort of navigate around in the world, but what seems to be lacking is the way things, and I'm sort of picking up on what you say, the way things are salient to them. Things don't stand out. They don't grasp their attention. It doesn't arouse their metabolic energy. And that seems to be a function of relevance realization, not a function of the representation, because the salience of a representation is different than its ability to represent, right? And so I think it's when things become salient to us that you get that snapping out phenomena that you're talking about.
Well, okay, I want to answer the last part first. My worry about all these words, salience and so on and so forth, right, this information salient, is that, I'm going to sound like McDowell now. I don't think it's information that's salient. I think it's what the information says that's salient. It's the truck appearing to be that's salient, not the information about it. I can indirectly get the information to be salient, but only in virtue of, the truck.
So we're disputing the causal, which causes which. So
no, I'm glad you say that, because one of the things that I think is interesting about information is it isn't always caused by what it's about. That's the most interesting thing to me. This comes up in information too, right? That whatever. That's why I was saying the semantic relations aren't actually causal. That's what I'm actually in cognitive science, is because I think cognitive science is a site where we can dismantle the hegemony of the mechanist philosophies of the 17th century. Just to make up a little.
I don't disagree with you on that project.
I know. And John and I, don't get this wrong. John and I agree. When we're locked up for our views, they're going to put us in the same wing.
No.
But so I think that's important. I do think, because we're physical creatures, that there will be stories about what goes on, such that we're able to do these things, right? And so in a way, the question is not how does it work quite, because we might end up being close there, but what explains how it is that we work, right? And that's where I'm going to want to revert outwards a lot. So that's one.
Okay.
Number two, but sorry, I want to say a couple of things.
No, go ahead.
The paramecium. So I remember reading, actually, Maturana, Terry Whittaker brought Maturana and, what's his name?
Varela?
Well, Varela was there too, out to San Francisco, so it doesn't matter. But anyway, so I was reading this draft of Autopoietic Systems, right, with Varela. I was pretty young, and I wrote exclamation marks on margins all over the place. I was so upset, because what I said was, this is just biology, because all the structural coupling wasn't coupling to the world, it was coupling to the surface, right? That's what structural coupling is, stuff crosses the boundary, right, and so on and so forth. And I think it's tough to know whether the paramecium actually cares about there being sugar in the environment, or whether they care about sugar being, as it were, crossing the boundary. I'm not sure there's real orientation towards that which is beyond the boundary. The regularities about the paramecium's behavior will advert to facts, like, so if there's a pile of sugar here and there's no pile of sugar here and apparently they're all going over here, you're going to say, well, look, they're going over there because that's where the sugar is. But I'm not sure you need to advert to the paramecium caring about anything other than what's structurally inconvenient. So I'm actually worried about and a little bit that's true with the truck driver phenomenon, that you can kind of just respond to things pretty damn locally. so I'm not sure that the positing of external directedness isn't a little bit of imposition from the point of the theorists often. But do you think you're conscious when you're dreaming?
I think I'm conscious when I'm dreaming, yes.
Yes. See, I don't. So that might be helpful. I mean, in the sense we might be talking about different things. Because I'll tell you what's wrong with my dreams. You know, I'm driving along and it's a car, and you know, pretty soon it turns out actually I'm in a sailboat, and you know, it turns out now it's a river, and you know, 47 people are there, and then you know, it turns out that this person's a banana. I'm going to eat them for breakfast. That's not. You know what I mean? It's like the thing's unconstrained. It just is whatever. It's like I've taken too much Prozac, and it's just whatever. You know, whatever. Any moment. There needn't be any continuity, any integrity. And so hold on, the last chapter of Truth and Rule Following Up is having thought-provoking. He talks about how, in order to be a knowing creature, maybe he's not really talking about consciousness. He says, look, if the world starts to misbehave, you got to get upset. You have to hold the world accountable to being the world. And if this cup, I mean, I know the second law says it's possible, but if this cup goes up and down for a moment like that, just on its own, I will probably think I blinked. Because, damn it, the world isn't going to do that. I insist that the world not do that, right? So I have to assign responsibility for this misbehavior on the part of the world. I take it on myself as well. Because it matters to me that the world remain world. And if the world started to really just come apart, I would freak. I mean, seriously, Cam H type freaking, right? They trundle me off with white coats. So there's something about that sense of being deferring to that which I take to have more authority than I do, that I think I lack in dreams. I mean, they do have a qualitative character, so I'm not. It was a real question. I wasn't trying to make a point with the question. I do think there is some kind of phenomenological character to the dream, but there isn't this thing that I guess I think of as being oriented not to death, but to the world.
So I just want to be clear. That's an argument. So you preface that by saying you don't think you're conscious in dreams. I just want to make sure that I understand the point of the argument. Because dreams lack a certain kind of intelligibility. Right? Is that what you're saying, that they lack an intelligibility, they lack an explanatory coherence? And
they lack a sort of normative depth. But a relinquishing of a theory to what's the case over a selfish one.
Right, but the normative deference you explained in terms of the intelligibility, the coherence, the hanging togetherness of the world.
Well, I would actually run the explanation the other way around, that the intelligibility actually is honor bound to doing justice to it. You might change your sense of intelligibility in order for it to hold still. But take that to be a separate point for now.
Okay,
let's say I agree with you.
But again, I don't see why it's not possible to have a completely. I mean, I believe in my long-term memory, a really well worked out, highly coherent, theory of this or a theory of that, which has all of those properties you're talking about. It defers to the rational normativity. It's truth governed. It hangs together well. It has explanatory coherence. And yet I'm not consciously aware of it right now because I'm not talking about Darwin's theory of evolution, right? And again, it seems I can have all of the properties you're gesturing towards, and the deference to normativity, the commitment to rationality, truth governance, coherence, right? All those things, and yet I don't have consciousness. And yet in dreams, I lack all those things, and many people would say they have many of the features we find in consciousness. That's, there's qualia, there's a what's it like to be, there's a perspectival aspect to it. So I think the contrast is exactly making my point. Dreams lack the very thing you say they lack. They're conscious. I can have the very same thing you point to in my unconscious theories, and there we go.
Well, okay, so with respect to the Darwinian theory, one of the things, I guess, that I think is, there's a movie, I think Brunel made this movie, I'm not sure, but anyway, Object of Desire or something? I have not seen it. So anyway, how about this for a bad example when you get on the
Pure object of desire.
The pure object of desire. There we go. So my sense is this guy is in love with not a woman, but his idea of this woman. And so the movie director had two different actresses play the one woman. So there's a cut and it comes back and it's a different actor. And nobody noticed. And there's something wrong with this guy. I just want to take that as a presupposition. And my sense is that's because the guy's committed to his idea of this woman, not to the woman.
Right.
And you can't really live with somebody, it seems to me, in an ethical way, unless you actually are committed to them, not to your conception. The worry I have about the Darwinian theory is that in order to really hold that theory, I think, as a scientific theory, you have to actually be committed not to the theory, but to that which the theory is the theory of, such that it's invulnerable to what's the case. Mm-hmm. And when you're not conscious, you're not, thinking about it consciously, you could end up just believing the theory, because the theory has these problems. But see, I keep saying, to me, it's not the theory. It's sort of what the theory is the theory of, that I think the deference has to be to. And my worry is that when it's not conscious, you can just sort of be committed to it. And also, so then I want to say something about the pure consciousness stuff. You, I think, did say that there's a here-ness and a now-ness of some sort that seems to
Yeah, because people
drench, not be meta level reflected upon, but nevertheless drench it.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say I'm not sure about these meditative states. I probably have less authority and less experience both than you by a long shot. So I just want to admit that.
I'm not making an argument on my authority. There's lots of
there's lots of people who say this. One of the things that I think is problematic is the assumption that the world comes chopped up, as I said, right? It comes chopped up the way people think it does. And I think letting go of the idea that the world is actually carved up the way philosophy texts tell us it is, and actually taking in the genuine richness of the world is actually pretty damn hard cognitively and pretty threatening.
Mm-hmm.
And my sense, and I don't know the literature, my sense of what my experience of these kinds of states really was letting go not of there being world, but of there being the world as carved up. And that the sense of nowness and the sense of here-ness and the sense of awakeness was parasitic on experience. Whereas on your view, I think you would have to say that it's intelligible from your point of view for the creature to arise. It never represented anything. But nevertheless, the first state it ended up in was pure consciousness. That it's not actually parasitic on any notion of consciousness of. And that just, it passes beyond my, as it were, my imagination. I'm not saying it's wrong. I honestly don't know, but it...
Sure. Okay. So, I don't know. I don't know how much we can pursue this because it's going to be sort of descriptive labeling battle. I guess that I find that claim about the world seems to violate the central claim that seems to be close to universal, that this is a state of no-thingness, right?
Right.
Right.
Well, let me just I'll just comment on this. I do think there's a limit to how much, and I actually want to hear what all these people think of these people who actually take to be there. Which is part of my point.
I'll take them to be there too.
I think the no-thingness is very telling, and actually, I think like you, I take it to be enormously important. I mean, it's very significant. The thing that I think is that the thingness is not something, as it were, God put out there. The thingness is part of our representational registrational practice of trying to carve the world up into intelligibility. We do an enormous injustice to the world in carving it up to thing. I think any Canadian who's gone canoeing should not believe in thingness, because you are on some river up north, and I say, okay, look, you're a student of cognitive science. How many things are up there down the river? Is that little branch? Is that a separate thing? Is that one? I mean, it's crazy to think that the world comes chopped up into things. I think it's a conceit of excessive education. And so actually letting go of there's no things seems to me just the beginning of actually having your eyes open to the world. So my point is only that we can completely concur on the relinquishing of this kind of grasping of things. I mean, I think we do concur on it, actually. I'm not making this up. I think we both concur that's not the foundational thing going on. Sorry. That's not foundationally what's going on. But what's interesting, I think, is when you give up on thingness, what do you have to do to give up on thingness? And one view is to give up on the world because we take the world to consist of things. And my view is you give up on thingness in order to let go of yourself and actually take on the world. This comes up, just a footnote, in the epoche in phenomenology, whether the epoche is a bracketing of the world, or is it a bracketing of our natural ontological attitude towards the world?
The difference between Husserl and Heidegger.
Yeah. So it's an honored topic. So I just think giving up thingness is great. What route you want to go, we might differ.
Okay, so I think what's happening then is we're starting to differ. I think I see that we're differing more fundamentally in what we mean by the word representation, because it strikes me that that to be a representation is to have something you seem to, I think, also agree with, that you have some kind of determinate content in which truth valuation is possible. And it's hard to understand for me what that is when any kind of determinate thingness goes away.
Yeah, it's not hard for me, so here we do.
Okay. Well, so you have some other account of so you think it's possible for there to be a representation without having a determinate target?
Without having a thing determinate target.
Okay, so what's the determinate target in the pure consciousness event?
The. Why do I say the? It's because if I follow the word the with any predicate, then we've restricted the thing, right? So the world, the earth, whatever the audience is saying. The minute you put it in, you've got all these predicates going on, and it kind of thingifies everything.
But that is being used categorically in that pure consciousness event. So I could say a pure consciousness event, and you'd lose your argument. So that's not quite what you mean.
Well, I mean by the something that probably people have used the word starting with G and ending in OD before in different mystical traditions over history. So whether a comparative theologian would take the content of a meditative state of pure consciousness to be a Buddhist analog of a mystical state would be in awe before God. I mean, I think we're actually talking about that in non-religious language. I actually don't know that I would know what the difference was.
See, that for me is exactly what I was pointing to earlier. I don't think that's a representation. That's just finding sort of super salience. Just finding, right? Just.
Well, okay, but actually, Jesse, you're going to have to shut us up, because just because we agree that we're going to stop talking doesn't prove we actually will. See, it's so interesting, John, because that we care about the information, we care about the representation, we care about the work with the representation. This is super salient, and I don't think I don't think the representation is super salient. I think Anna is super salient, and I happen to be representing her. I keep wanting to push the words you use out onto what it is in the world that they're, as it were, targeting me towards.
But I don't see how relevance or salience can be a property of the world, because this table is salient 1 minute and not the next. It's salient to you, and
right.
It's not salient to that.
That's the problem with taking the thing as the object of the thing.
Right. Okay, but whatever. Like if it's just like I'm
right.
trying. What is it that salience is inhering in out there is what I would be asking.
I would say the stupefying and surpassing differentiation of that towards which I'm oriented and that in which I'm engulfed in all this kind of stuff. And
but that existed before there were sentient beings. The fact that there's just so much.
Oh, right, it existed before there were beings.
But then it wasn't salient.
Well, it wasn't salient to projects of the salient being, because there was no salient being. I mean, things aren't just salient on their own.
But that's what you were saying a minute ago, that Anna is salient. It's a property of Anna.
No, it's because actually I'm hoping she'll take us out to dinner.
Because you said you want to keep getting me to defer it onto the world, and I keep saying I don't think salience is a property of the world.
But
salience is a property of how difficult it is for us to process information, how difficult or fluent or advantageous it is for us to process information about the world. That's why I was comparing it to evolutionary
no,
thinking.
but suppose, I don't know, I'm talking to Jesse, and we're going to drive to this strange place that Anna's recommended we have dinner in Huntsville. And we sort of think about, are we ready to go? Huntsville? We go. And then it turns out we forgot to check whether the tires were inflated, and they're not, and we go flat, and we go off the ice, and we die. So it turned out in retrospect that I don't think completely flat-footed here, that pressure in the tires was salient. It didn't mean it was my processing information. It was salient because we died. So
No, because if you make salience anything that could be causally relevant to your goals, then the whole universe is salient.
Right.
Because the bridge had to stay, stable. There had to be a good English precedent law in place for like all of that has to be the case. And the whole universe turns out to be salient.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Okay.
That's why I never publish.
Okay, but if everything is salient, then you lose one of the central functions of salience, which is to give us a selectional normativity.
Well, I won't deny that a huge task that we face as sentient creatures is to deploy apparatus in our brain to work through, I wouldn't put it quite the same way, we'd be close, right? To work through our understanding of the world in such a way so that we can actually selectively put our attention into certain kinds of things because we actually think their salience isn't rather doubt or we can affect it and so on and so forth. But just as in logic, as the poor people who are about to jump through the glass know from having sat through too many lectures about logic in the Go-Fi part of the course, what I think matters about logic is that all of the rules and so on and so forth are normatively governed by not their structure, but what it is that they're about kind of stuff. So my sense is that, yeah, we have to do that. And there's undoubtedly apparatus in there. And that which you referred to by the phrase relevance realization, which I still don't quite get, I don't doubt its importance. And actually, it's interesting. I was just talking to Jeff Hinton, who's everyone in this audience probably knows, and we were talking about the Lytle report. I don't know how many people here remember the Lytle report, but anyway, it was a thing indicting the possibility of AI. And Jeff and I were saying, the Lytle report was actually right. Because it couldn't imagine computers of the scale that Google is using to do the deep network stuff that Jeff is doing about the amount of information you have to process in order to actually figure out what's germane and what's not. To use germane as my version of what you might use for word relevant.
Sure.
Right? So it's stunning that we do that. I want to completely agree with you on that. But I guess all I would say is that, like the rules of logic, what normatively governs that is love.
John, you've got about 10 minutes talking before you have to Brian.
You guys talk 10 minutes more than I.
I've talked to him more than this for
But maybe I should just tell a bunch of jokes. Yeah, I guess I have a problem with that because, as I said, I think, for me, it sounds like it's what's, again, maybe there's a distinction here that's implicit that, so maybe it's a question then. I'm challenging the notion of representation, which I tried to specify because in sort of Fodorian terms is having this, and you said something similar. It has to have this causal role. I think you have to mean something stronger. Causal role for something like a cognitive agent, right? If I had just my thermostat, I don't think you'd make that attribution. So I'm challenging that notion because I think that notion comes after this ability to orient attention and make decision as to what's going to arouse and drive you motivationally. But perhaps I've made a mistake in that I concentrated on that, and you seem to be talking about a more, perhaps to use a little bit of philosophy, you seem to have there's an intentional relation that seems to be thwarting most of what I understand by the term representation, that you seem to be gesturing to with the the-ness, if I can coin a horrible word. That's got to be the worst philosophical jargon ever, eh? The-ness. And then I might be agreeing with you, because I do think, and I would even perhaps suggest to you that the people coming out of the continental tradition, even people like Thompson, do think that there is a kind of non-representational intentionality, a primordial kind of connectedness and directedness to the world. And I'm trying to get that in terms of this notion of something like evolutionary, analogous to evolutionary fittedness to the environment, to capture that. And my argument would be is that sort of, I don't know, I'm going to sound ridiculously Heideggerian, that sort of primordial intentionality is what puts the constraints on the selection that turns the variation into representation. That's the kind of picture. And I'm not arguing against that kind of primordial directedness. I'm arguing that I think it's fundamentally non-representational in nature, because representations depend on that primordial intentionality to be constituted in the first place. That's what I would say.
Okay, let me try this, if I might, even though I'm going to be turning up your meter, if I merely had to. I'm going to try to formulate an agreement, so in the spirit of exactly what you just said. I think we have been given, infected by, I don't know, whatever, a classic notion of representation. I'm just going to use the word classic notion of representation.
Sure.
I don't know what I mean.
Right.
But, which makes a bunch of assumptions, which is built on a number of assumptions. One of them, I think, is the world is thingy. I mean, it takes the world to sort of consist of all these things, right? That's one thing. Probably some other properties too, compositionality, whatever, lots of stuff that Fodor and Smolensky and so on sort of debate about. I think we both think that may be true some. But if it's true at all, it's true pretty late. That's a pretty highly advanced sort of thing. And, if you think of David Kirsch's paper, Today the Earwig, Tomorrow Man, like, that thing is pretty much tomorrow. That's not, as it were, in the aboriginal emergence of consciousness and directedness of the world and fromness, or whatever it is we say. That's pretty late. And I think we also agree that some sense of being enmeshed, embedded, maybe even oriented, potentially directed, something like that, is actually pretty important. I mean, sort of thing. There's another thing, I think, on which we agree. And I actually think that's really neat. I mean, I think it's really important that this classic notion of representation it can't wear the trousers that it was thought to wear with respect to explaining mind. I think it can't wear them ontologically. You sort of think it can't wear them epistemologically. Maybe we both agree with both. We're leaning on different aspects. But that's actually not going to... That's been assumed to be the representational theory of mind. It's sort of been in the center of the room with respect to Cogsai's project. And Cogsai isn't going to succeed with it. And then maybe our articulations of, to put it too glibly, I would say, look, there's some fundamental deep truth about representation, but it's nothing like, it doesn't need to be that. That's a tiny specific version. It has all those pernicious properties. But I want to rescue something profound about it for a wider project. And you sort of think, well, look, that is what representation is, so let's set it aside. And so your way of getting around it is just sort of framed a little differently and maybe a different emphasis and so on and so forth. But we're both trying to steer out from that towards a kind of embodied being in the world that can be oriented towards the world which is not constituted of this late, excessively articulated notion of representation which has been taken to be the center ground of cognitive science. something like that.
Yeah. I guess that what might differ is I'm willing to concede that the paramecium might have a very primitive version of that primordial, non-classical, representational connectedness, directedness towards the world.
Right, and so might I. I'm just saying it's the classical notion, this highly articulated thingness, compositional systematicity, classical notion that the paramecium doesn't have.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think, yeah.
Ah, okay. So that would mean, therefore, that we're both in agreement. The notion of representation that I'm pointing to, of course, is drawn directly from computational functionalism, right? That kind of idea, because it's committed to, propositional structure. You said it, systematicity, all that kind of stuff. So that seems to commit you then to the claim that computational functionalism is never going to have purchase on the core of cognition and consciousness.
All right, I gotta buy you whiskey. My sense, but I mean, we can agree here. I think I just want to say what I think. My sense is that conception of computational functionalism in the hands of philosophers and cognitive scientists and psychologists. Were computation like that, you would be absolutely right. I don't think computation is anything like that. In fact, I think philosophers of mind and functionalists and stuff don't have a clue about computing. And I think the idea that it's propositional and all that kind of stuff is just false. I mean, if you look at 35 million lines of code in Windows 7 or something like that, they confuse. The thing that's compositional is a programming language. It's not the program that you run. Programming language, you construct this machine that has bizarrely complicated, non-compositional, non-systematic approaches. Then they're all compiled off of the zeros and ones and zeros. So I think it's a profound misunderstanding of computing. But it is kind of what the computational functionalism idea in cog sci is. And so I think there's another big problem, which is that philosophers don't get computing. But, sorry, I just think they haven't.
Okay. But you agree.
But I agree with the substance of what you're saying. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's fair enough.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough.
And so I guess what I'm pointing to is I think that let's put aside what you said about we agree that there's this standard notion of computational functionalism,
right, yeah,
at least. I think one of the other big problems that has faced and not been resolvable by computational functionalism is exactly the relevance realization issue. And I think what I've been trying to argue, one of the things I've been trying to argue is that these two problems are not distinct problems. That the issue about how we get this kind of connectedness and directedness into the world meshes with the problem of how we could get an understanding of cognition other than the standard computational, because it can't do the relevance realization stuff.
I mean, Jesse, you got to interrupt soon because we're agreeing too much. I think this is what I was talking to Jeff Hinton about, actually, was that the amount of horsepower and what gets called vagueness, which I think is absolutely wrongly called vagueness, but the non-thinginess of the concepts and the categories in the world thing, the complexity of that is actually necessary in order to actually get systems that can orient towards the world, given that it's as messy as it is. It's actually staggering. It's humbling. Mm-hmm. But I think, yes, you need that in order to actually be kind of oriented towards the world. I mean, I think that's... In other words, not only do I think I agree with you, I agree with me. And it's often not true, but right now it's true. But I think I agree with you. And I think these are similar projects. But oddly enough, I actually think Hinton's deep neural networks are kind of also in this ballgame.
Well, I'm glad you say that, because I think he actually implements a lot of the stuff that I argued is going on in relevance realization, the data compression, the data particularization, the dynamic self-organization, and recursivity. So
we also agree on this, that Hinton's implementing our views even though he doesn't know.
Yes.
Because I think he's implementing representation, and he doesn't think he's. So.
No, I know. And so, yeah, that's why I found it odd when you cited him as an ally, but I gave you your point.
Yeah. Does he think he's implementing relevance?
Okay, my co-authors on the relevance realization paper in 2012, Tim Wildekamp and Blake Richards, were two of his most prominent proteges, and they were convinced that what they were doing with me was completely consonant with Jeff's work. But Jeff would never say yes or no to that. But Jeff often will not say yes or no to things.
Yeah.
So that's
Fair
the,
enough.
that's the best answer I can give you.
I think the world's intelligible.
You're a Neoplatonist through and through.
I've been accused of that before.
That was a compliment. I have Plotinus tattooed on my wrist.
Well, I think that's a pretty good place to start asking for some questions, but I think first we should give them all a round of applause. All right, hands.
So I want to talk about possibly ambiguous use of the term world, I think that you guys were using. And you're dropping one of my homeboys' names around, Heidegger, so I'm going to go there. So, I mean, trivially, the one world, which is the object-oriented world, which is comprised of things. So when you have representations that are directed to that, you need some sort of mechanism to map them on, to get to that, because they're something that's removed and distinct from us. So that's trivial. That's the conception I think everybody's operating under. But in Heidegger and Husserl, you have definitions of world where they're intentional in and of themselves. They don't need any further ways of mapping or getting us closer to it, because that's what they're comprised of. Instead of having isolated, separate things that can be ordered in space, you have a totality of significance or mutual reference of all objects. So it's a cohesive unity that it doesn't make sense to say that we're intentional towards. It's what it's comprised of. And perhaps disambiguating those on some of the claims would help make a bit of sense of some of the points made.
I was trying to do that.
I think so, yeah.
Because I was trying to make a difference between the world as referring to a determinate set of objects, using your language, and you even invoked a synonym, a world of significance, a world in which things are relevant to each other and relevant to me, they stand out, and I was saying that I didn't think that was a property of the world of objects, and that I am influenced by Dreyfus's reading, in his book Being in the World, I should say, that basically what we're ultimately talking about again is, how things matter to us, how they're relevant to us, how we find them relevant to each other in terms of how they're relevant to us. And so I think the worldliness of the world, the Daseining, if I can coin a horrible another new word, is ultimately, again, a matter of this relevance realization. And I think what my argument is, and I think Brian agreed with it at some point, is that relevance realization is presupposed and necessary before you can get the determinate reference representation to thingy objects in the world. So that's exactly what I was trying to say. And I think that was part of Heidegger's move, because Heidegger was trying to get us to realize that as distinct from, the Cartesian reference to distinct objects, because he thought by moving to that sense we could, get out of a lot of the epistemological entanglement we had got into. Now, you may not agree with that reading of Heidegger, but that's a reading of Heidegger like that.
Right, yeah, I probably wouldn't agree that you would have the mechanism per se, but I do understand your reading, so that's, I won't comment on it. Thank you for that.
Okay.
I'll just say quickly, it's hard for me to quite use these words, because to me the world is taking it to consist of objects is a way of taking it, but it's not that there is that world. I mean, because my worry is if there is that world, then you get this kind of specious, as an absolutely unethical pluralism of a certain sort. So, in a way, my sense of the way for us to understand the world is much closer to your world of significance and so on and so forth. But two things about it I think are important for Cog Sci. One of them is that I actually think that view of the world is actually much more intelligibly arising out of the differential equations that underlie the physical plenum. I mean, in other words, I think there's a kind of extreme physicalism that is much closer to a Heideggerian world of significance than this intermediating level of things, which has been the sort of bad legacy of a certain kind of modernist metaphysics. So I think one doesn't have to be anti, as it were, physicalism in order to understand how that could emerge out of the plenum. That's one thing. And also, I don't want to give away reference and thing and so on and so forth to that bad metaphysics, because I actually think there's something deep about them. They never were what it was that modernism took them to be. So I kind of hang on to a lot of these words and saying no, reference is to the in certain kinds of ways.
Leo's been.
I just a dream question. I've been thinking about this. Do you take consciousness to necessarily be concerned with the world? Because I imagine a radical solipsist non-realist. Are they conscious?
Well, I have to admit that I actually don't think radical solipsism is intelligible. I mean, I don't get it. You know what I mean? Like, I can sort of imagine I get it, but I think I'm wrong. I just cannot understand what a radical solipsism would actually be. So I just want to, that's a kind of point of humility. This is,
It's not like a philosophical zombie argument, right?
Sorry?
It's not like a zombie argument.
Yeah, although I think I'm prepared to say zombieism is wrong. Whereas, but anyway, that said, there's a worry. I have a worry that seems to me to underlie the question, which is sort of a sense that, in fact, we're separate from the world. This is a part of the Descartes stuff, which is terrible. It's sort of we're in the world out there and so on. So that's impossible. So if you've got a solipsism, then you're all that's kind of there is. Well, then your world is you. And so is it about the world? Well, it's probably is, because your world is just you, kind of stuff. So I don't know. Saying, look, consciousness isn't about the world because you're solipsist and there isn't a world. That strikes me as just a logical error. You know what I mean? So I'm not saying you're making it.
No. I'm curious because, I mean, I would fall on the side of saying that when you're dreaming, you're conscious. Even if you're disconnected, let's say, from the external world, you would say then you're still connected to the world, even if it's your internal world. But then you said that you're not conscious if you're dreaming. This is the part where I'm having difficulty.
Yeah, see, there's a kind of self stuff, right? Enjoy yourself, all this kind of stuff, right? What you're going to figure out when you like. I mean, there's a kind of, I'm not accusing anybody here of that, of course. We're all enlightened. But my worry that in your dream, you're just about your own world. I'm not sure it's you. I mean, it seems to me it's fictional. It's a fantasized world. And your brain is maybe fantasizing it. But I'm not sure it's self-directed. It's falsely directed. There's nothing that it's about. I don't think it's about you.
Well, but that falsity, I mean, this is another issue you were talking about.
Yeah.
Hearing the news that some person's in the hospital.
Right.
And the block of lead between you and Mount Sinai doesn't prevent the caring.
Right.
But you heard wrong. You're not at Mount Sinai at all.
Right, so I'm wrong.
The block of lead is irrelevant, and
right.
You're not in the hospital at all.
Right.
But you still have that same feeling.
Right, and I'm wrong.
And even though there's a mistaken truth value.
Right.
It just seems that consciousness can't, while consciousness may habitually or usually or generally be concerned with the world, it seems to me that it can't be solely just concerned with the world. That is, you can be conscious of it without reference to the world.
I guess my sense is you can't say of the thought that they're in the hospital when they're not in the hospital, that thought is wrong, unless what it was about was somebody in the hospital. Because to be wrong, it has to be false that they're in the hospital. So it remains true that it's an idea about the hospital, just a wrong idea. So I actually think you have to have the world to be wrong. I mean, I don't know about truth, but wrongness I know about. I agree.
Say anything about this?
I'm just, no, give me a minute. I got to process the argument there because I'll come back to it.
Any questions up there? No? Yep. Yeah.
So in the dream case, you can be wrong in your dreams in the sense that you can make the wrong prediction or what's going to happen in your dreams.
Right.
But the existence of the future isn't the same as the existence of the world. And it seems like our model of the world is just something we use to set up our predictions. And we're wrong about the world. At least we only know that we're wrong with the world if we make a wrong prediction. So it seems it's just a shorthand for talking about prediction of the future. Like why do we make models? to explain things, wanting to explain things, to predict the future, wanting the future to choose action. That on that sort of view, you can be wrong. But you don't need this view that there's a world to have wrongness. You just have wrong predictions. You just have to believe in the future, I guess.
Right. Okay. So let's say. Sorry, I confess I'm missing this. I think I believe in the future.
Yes.
And I can be wrong about the future.
Yes.
For example, by the time your kids graduate from high school, petty jealousy and egocentricity and tribalism will be over. Okay, I'm wrong. I think you need the world. You need the future in order for that to be wrong.
The future of the world.
Well, the world includes
The world is the future. Okay, perhaps the world would include the future, but the mere fact that believing in the world entails you can believe in the future doesn't mean that you couldn't believe in the future without believing in the world.
You can believe in the future without believing in the world?
Yeah, like external world, for various senses of the word external. As long as there's if there's something which is internal that has a future, you can believe merely in that future and not in the existence of anything that is considered external.
Yeah, but I guess I think it's really important. I mean, I would have thought if we had learned anything from the Cartesian critique, from the critique of Descartes, it's that the world is not outside us. We're in it.
That's where you draw the boundary. Like it's terminological where you draw the boundary between internal and external, it seems.
But I think the world is something such that you can't draw the boundary between it and, I mean,
well, you can't draw the right boundary.
Why any boundary at all?
Huh?
Why any boundary at all?
Oh, well, people do it. I don't know why.
Yeah, I don't believe in them. Sorry, I don't mean to entirely kid, but I actually don't quite. It seems to me if there's any future, if you think I'm just.
Wait a sec. There's reasons why. I mean, I don't want to stand here and just defend Descartes, but
No, sure.
I mean, there's original reasons why Descartes did this. I mean, Descartes was faced with, how do you account for appearance-reality distinction, right? How do you account for the fact that the scientific revolution is saying, purpose and beauty and these things are not in the world, so they have to be somewhere else, right? So, I mean, he made the division in order to try and account for, the appearance-reality distinction, the fact that we can all see the sun rising in the east and setting in the west, and we're all wrong because the math tells us we're wrong. I mean, and there's a distinction between, between how things are, right, and how they seem to us to be. And I think you need that distinction in order to, talk about falsity or talk about the possibility of us engaging in error, where error means a failure, right, of some sense, to meet a norm.
I would have thought I completely agree with everything you just said.
Well, I'm trying to say why people draw the boundary. The way of drawing a boundary is to try and say it is difficult to locate, appearance as a thing amongst the furniture of the universe that physics and chemistry and biology is giving us. So, right, we draw a boundary.
Isn't the project of cognitive science kind of founded on the idea that the world that science has said includes electrons and so on and so forth, also includes seeing?
I don't disagree with that, Brian. What I'm saying is that's the problem to be solved. That's the goal to be realized. Right. Adam is trying to say there's a problem to be, if I understand him correctly, there's a problem that needs to be solved. I agree with you that is in some sense right, but that's not the same thing as giving me an explanation of how that problem
how seeming arises.
That's right.
Leo, you can be quick.
Right, yeah, okay. Necessarily very maps, right? I believe that atoms are a useful explanatory machine that gives me some beneficial means of interacting with the world, but that doesn't mean that I'm totally sold and that's bedrock, capital T, truth, like atoms, right? So I mean, I'm having a bit of difficulty with this notion that the physical universe is in this way and that everything is going to emerge just like that from it. I mean, there seems to be things that we're assigning, at least from a other perspective.
I guess, I don't know, I don't mean to be, I feel like I'm being awkward in a way. I'm actually not intending to be awkward. So I guess the question
I didn't mean to box you in that way.
No, sorry. Hell, lead can't stop me.
Jinsung's been trying to speak on this
Oh,
for
okay,
a while.
okay.
I guess getting a little bit away from the dream bit, but on a similar note to something that you were saying about. So it sounded like Brian were trying to say that somehow consciousness needs to be concerned with rational cohesion, truth preservation, things like that. So I guess, well, I can come at this from a couple of points of view. One is, let's say that I spiked Jesse's glass of juice in the morning with hallucinogens.
That explains the thing.
And so he imagines that there are dragons and unicorns in our kitchen. How they would fit in there is beyond me, but anyway, he imagines these things. So I guess my question is while he is hallucinating, is he somehow not conscious?
I think I'm going to bite the bullet and say yes, he's somehow not conscious. And you provided the somehow, so that's I'm kind of hiding in the somehow. Yeah, I think that his consciousness is awry. I do think, though, two things are, I think, important here. One of the things I take seriously, I think, is that I think that hallucination and a lot of other things, the conception of solipsism, as much as I'm able to understand it, and so on and so forth, I take to be derivative on our consciousness of the world we're in. So I would ask, as it were, rhetorically, the same thing I asked John, which is, if you think that's conscious and you don't need the world and so on and so forth, could you imagine something getting to that state without ever having had the world at all and so on and so forth? And I actually kind of draw a blank at that point. I kind of think, maybe this is Heideggerian, I'll defer to you, but my sense is you kind of have to be thrown in the world and sort of get a sense of all this stuff in order to do these excrescences of various sorts. So it's completely parasitic on the main case, and I guess I'm kind of leaning on the main case. But another thing I want to say, which I think has come up, and it's a point I want to agree with you, John, on I think our agreement there, because I think it's interesting, actually. You were saying that maybe my idea of consciousness and so on and so forth is dependent on truth and rationality and so on and so forth. And I actually would say it's not the way that's normally conceived, and I think the reasons are interesting, which is I think this, if I could use orientation or something, for this orientation towards the world, of being in the world, whatever it is that I think John and I are sort of agreeing on, there's something sort of primordial, which founds a great deal of what we then do in these advanced stages where we thingify the world and end up with first-order logic classes. I feel like truth and rationality are our conceptions of them are founded on that stuff, and that stuff is actually subservient to being thrown in the world in a certain way. So I would actually say truth and rationality are accountable to being in the world, not that my sense of world is accountable to them. I don't think there's a priori, in this sense I'm not a rationalist in the historical sense of that. I don't think there's a priori logic and rationality and stuff that were God-given and they came in through another door and we got them, and then in fact the sense of world is accountable to them. I actually think whether something's rational should be held accountable to, think about reason, right? Reason's an interesting notion because we talk about reason. Take the word reasonable. In ordinary parlance, reasonable is kind of interesting because if something's not reasonable, maybe reason should be held accountable to being reasonable, and account should be held accountable to being accountable. There's something sort of normative and pragmatically embedded and so on and so forth with respect to the current lay uses of the adjective. So I don't disagree that there's something about my conception of being conscious of the world and my conception of truth and so on and so forth that are tied together. But I think at a deep level, the dependence goes the other way.
Yeah, I'm a little bit concerned about, I'm not taking back our agreement either, but I'm a little bit concerned about the epistemic states attributed to consciousness and its epistemic success or failure. It seems to me to be sort of being, I don't know, assimilated to, those properties by which it's said to exist. It seems like you're saying that, like, I take it most people's intuitions go the other way. Jun-sung's intuition is, if I have a lot of the features of consciousness, if I have greenness and redness and, and a perspectival sort of take on it, and I know what it's like to be seeing a unicorn and all those features, then I have consciousness, regardless of whether or not my epistemic judgments turn out to be true or false. And that's a very powerful intuition that most of us have. And although I agree with sort of your goals of challenging the Cartesian, the implications of the Cartesian worldview, I haven't really seen something that directly challenges that intuition, that very powerful intuition, that, what picks out consciousness are these set of properties that are constitutive of its ontological status, independent of its epistemic success or failure.
Yeah, I think I hear you.
That's good.
Understand? No, I think I understand what you're saying. I guess there's a kind of sense of charity or something, like principles of charity, translation, and so on. I can't. Maybe it's imaginative failure on my part. I actually don't know, but I know this is a very common view. Mm-hmm. I guess the sense I have is I think that common view is held by people not having realized how absolutely dependent that view is on there being notions like experience and seeing things and so on and so forth, and like in a dream and so on and so forth. All of the sense that there are things in the world, they course around it as three-dimensional width of time and, whatever. That it's just a tremendous debt to the ordinary case that is propping up these waves that are on top of it, kind of like a storm in the ocean. You've got to there's the ocean underneath it. That's actually profoundly important. So that's not an argument. That's just my sense of those sorts of things.
But see, I don't deny that the notion of appearance is dependent, and even asymmetrically dependent on the notion of reality. But that doesn't mean that you've thereby given me how appearance differs from reality. And if there's something difference between, being in a state of seeming and being in a state of not, that's part of what many people take to be, needs to be explained in about, being conscious. Because a lot of consciousness is not, in almost every sense, all consciousness is false, because it is at least false by radical incompleteness. I'm only picking up on such a small fraction of those properties that I'm more misrepresenting it than representing it. And if I tied consciousness to, getting at reality, then I'm not conscious of anything.
No, but this is the point of, I've got my hand up, so I want to get there in a minute, but this is my point about the Brunel movie, is that if you live with somebody, you have to be committed to them, not to what you're getting. Because if you are only committed to what you're getting about the person you're living with, you're not worth living with. Your commitment has to be to that which transcends your comprehension of it. And my sense is that if I say this cup, I know...
But I can't be conscious of what transcends my consciousness. I don't know what that means. What does that mean?
You're trying to expound. I guess what I mean is you can be conscious that that towards which you are oriented transcends your grasp of it. Think about Browning, right? Your reach, the reach of your reference, the reach of your commitment transcends your grasp of it.
Heaven should exceed a grasp. A man's reach should exceed his grasp, or what's a heaven for? Is that what you're quoting?
That's right. Exactly.
Okay. I just want to make sure.
And what the world's for, I might say.
Okay.
But
I'm actually trying to keep things roughly in some order.
It's not for me to call people.
So this is...
Oh, no, Jim, sorry. Jim John.
Oh.
Yes.
I've actually got some questions for John. So, first thing, John,
was it that on your view, so let's talk about visual experience,
Sure.
and so that we don't get confused, let's talk about phenomenal consciousness, the what it's like aspect of visual experience.
Sure.
Was your claim that visual phenomenal consciousness, for example, is representational or non-representational or partly representational? Could you give me a quick recap and then?
Yeah, what I was trying to say was that the aspect of the visual consciousness that's picked up by what's typically meant by the phenomenal aspect, which is what you're referring to, it is non-representational in that I think it is picking up on those processes that go into the constitution of the representational aspect of your visual perception. And I think those constitutive processes, because they're relevance realizing processes, cannot be representational, are not constituted by the manipulations of representations themselves. That's what I'm saying.
I see. So, okay, I'm not sure I understand that, but
that what you're picking up on when you pick up on what it's like to see the apple above and beyond the representational content of appleness or something like that is how that representational state is relevant to you, how it is salient to you, how it stands out to you, how you're oriented on it. And that orientation and standing out, those processes come before the representation, the representational aspect, and make it possible.
I see. So you don't take a stand then on whether so-called representationalists about phenomenal consciousness believe truly or falsely. So I have in mind people like Gilbert Harman or Fred Gretzky or William Lycan, or
Right.
most contemporary philosophers of mind. So when they say what makes the phenomenally conscious experience as of an apple phenomenally conscious is that it has such and such representational content. For you, that might well be true because, if I'm understanding correctly, when you say visual phenomenal consciousness is non-representational, you have a different sense of representational in mind. You mean that there's an element that goes into the generation of visual phenomenal consciousness that's constitutive, and that I'm talking about your relevance realization, and which is not itself essentially a matter of handling, processing representations. Is that what you mean?
That's exactly what I mean.
I see.
And
Okay.
that affords the possibility of, instead of having a sort of a meta representational account or a higher order representational account of consciousness, it affords the possibility of a recursive relevance realization, a higher order, relevance realization. And what I was gesturing towards is we seem to have a clear case of that in the pure consciousness event.
Okay, that brings me to my second question, and I'm going to limit myself to two, Jesse. Sorry if I may. Okay, so I don't really understand relevance realization, but that's a topic for another time. On the pure consciousness event, so is your view then that in that other sense of representational, the phenomenally conscious experience the meditator has when she quote-unquote experiences the pure conscious event, is your view that that experience lacks representational content? Is that what you mean when you say it has no thingness to it?
Yes.
I see. I don't understand that either. So just because content, having representational content, that is, there being a way things are represented as being, right, when you're in that state, that doesn't mean rich content. That doesn't mean detailed content. So, for example, suppose I'm subject to some intervention such that I experience for a brief duration of time some kind of Ganzfeld effect, right? It's just brain gray for, a couple of minutes or so, right? There's still a content to my experience. It's just informationally impoverished. So it's not clear to me.
It's not clear to me what you're referring to as the content, because there isn't even grayness in the pure consciousness event. It's not like you have a colored Ganzfeld. That's not what I'm talking about. That's not what it is. It's not that. So if you're imagining it in that way, then you're not.
Okay. Then I want to pose a dilemma to you.
Right.
Here are two conditions. One condition is the condition I'm in when I enjoy a state for which there's something it's like for me to be in it. My current visual experience puts me in this condition. As I see you, there's something it's like for me to see you.
Right.
Another condition is the condition I'm in when there's nothing it's like for me to be in that condition. Behind my head right now is such a condition. There's nothing it's like for me behind my head.
Mhm.
What you want to say about the pure consciousness event seems to require thinking of it as both having a what it's like for me nature, and yet simultaneously there being nothing it's like for me in undergoing the event. But that's a contradiction.
No,
So
it's not,
either
because there's no...
either the pure consciousness event is being misdescribed by those who've experienced, perhaps they misremember it, or it does have a what it's like element. There is a way the world is presented as being the subject of that experience. It's just that's a very informationally impoverished way. Perhaps it's sort of a limiting case of a way the world can be.
Well, I take it that then you're rejecting my claim that if you impoverish it enough, you've dropped out of representation into what I'm calling just pure information.
Yeah, I don't know what that means. I mean, if
Because
information is...
what it means is you've got content that can't do any of the standard work by which we functionally define what it is to be a representation.
But content means a correctness condition.
In what way could the pre-conscious event be false?
Well, but that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that either those who describe it as not having content are misdescribing it, or no, they're not misdescribing it. Sorry, I'm saying either they're misdescribing it, it does have some content, or the content that it has is just the condition it puts on the world in order for its content to be correct or true or accurate or whatever, is simply exceedingly minimal, right? Look, here's the simplest way to put the worry, and I've never experienced this, so I don't mean to sort of bully your phenomenology. That's not
No.
That's not the idea. It's that I don't understand, and I want to understand. If the event is phenomenally conscious, there's a way it's like for you to undergo that event. But if there's a way it's like, arguably, there's a way things are in some broad sense for you. But now you tell me, there's a way it's like for me, but there's no way it's like for me. I don't understand that.
Isn't it, can I just ask a question here? I would have thought that what John is saying is he is explicitly rejecting the assumption that there being something it is like to be is coextensive with there being a way the world presents. He's explicitly saying there being a way that there being a state such that there's something like to be in that state.
So it's the proverbial raw field, then. That's what the pure conscious event is.
That's what it would come down to. And so you were attributing, I tried to intervene, but you wanted to go.
Yeah.
I think you were attributing a contradiction to me because you're attributing an identity claim to me that I'm not making. In fact, I agree with Brian. What I'm saying the pure consciousness event does is peel those two senses apart.
So there's something it's like. It's phenomenally conscious, right? But there's nothing that can be said about it beyond saying that there's a way it feels. There's a way it feels.
That's what I was trying to get at by saying it's pure salience. And there's no conceptual content to it at all. Yes.
But salience, if something is salient to me, it's germane or relevant to me. And those are...
Well, I in the sense, like, I'll use your term, it's like the salience Gonsfeld. It's like the salience machinery, but it's completely evenly distributed amongst all possibilities.
So when I enter into this event, it's like, hey, relevant.
Yeah, the process of realizing relevance is itself all that you're finding relevant.
We've got about 2 minutes left, so I think.
I don't understand that, sorry.
Well, that's no different from saying the only way you know you're conscious is by being conscious.
Max, you had a question a while back.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to something that you guys had talked about being conscious of a thing beyond your grasping of it. Earlier there was a talk about being locked in, or being kind of locked into the world as part of prerequisite to being conscious. And it seems to me that all the behavioral data suggests that people are locked in or snapped into the world, both in a really impoverished and a really elaborate way that is really peculiar and is not tied to any aspect of utility, and there isn't any clear connection with the world necessarily. So my question would be to Brian is, could you specify, or what behavioral data suggests to you that you could specify these are the constitutive things that you have to be locked into or snapped into for you to be conscious? It seems to me that one couldn't specify that list. So being snapped in, quote unquote, couldn't be a prerequisite for consciousness or something like that.
Well, yeah, so I absolutely agree with you, I think, that I couldn't fill that list out. The reason I can't fill a list out is because that list is affable in a certain sense, because you're assuming I'm going to answer you in English roughly. So I'm going to answer with some words or things. It's going to be dangerously thingy. And my sense is that the foundations of ethics and normativity, and therefore for me semantics, and therefore for me consciousness in a way, is that one's deference, one's awe in some sense, that to which one is oriented, is not exhausted by the grasp one has on it. And so you can't list what grasp one has to have in order to be oriented towards the world, because that would be to put the grasps into the privileged position. I think the behavioral criteria, I don't know, I'm just trying to imagine the ethics experiment. We're going to test whether, a behavioral test whether Heidegger's right. It's a little daunting.
Yes.
But my sense is that the kind of behavior that I would take to be, as it were, supportive, empirically, in a certain sense of empirically supportive of this sort of sense, is the deference to what's the case when what one thinks about it is not true. So, if I think, I don't know, I think Ottawa's north of Montreal, but it's wrong. Montreal's actually north of Ottawa, it turns out. And, one of the whole things about cognitive penetration and all kinds of stuff about rationality and Fodor's anti-modularity arguments about so on and so forth, it's very difficult to figure out a behavioral test to figure out whether you actually believe that Montreal's north of Toronto. So I'm not sure you could exhaustively get at that, but nevertheless, you can usually figure out whether people think it's north or south. And my sense is, if somebody thinks it's south, I'm going to get this wrong now. If they think Montreal south, figure out what would be required in order for them to let go of that and realize that it's north. And my sense is there's no finite list of things that you could say would be the things that would convince them of that. But if you just kind of take, I think this brings up methodological challenges to empirical psychological tests as to getting at issues of rationality and commitment to the world. But my sense is, this is where we're different from programmers. Programmers, when your conception of the world and the world part company, debug the world, But for most of us, what our views in the world part company defer. And I think that deference, the fact that that deference can't be effed, right? It can't be put in articulate language, is a deep fact. That's not an answer, that's a gesture at why I don't think the question could be
I don't
asked.
know how palatable you find the dodge to say something like, it's in the language of neuroscience. You get snapped into the world, and that's consciousness, but you can't put it in the language of contextual psychology or something like that.
Yeah, I don't think you would.
If you wanted to have it not dumped there, then I feel like I would need, for me to buy you need snapped in to be prerequisite to consciousness, I feel like there would have to be some compositional list of things that would make you snapped in.
Well, I don't think, I would say read great literature. I profoundly don't think deference to the world is going to be explained by neuroscience. I just don't think it can do it. But I don't think that means there has to be behavioral criteria. I think the humanities in general, I think, historically, and I would include great novels here, are testament to the kinds of inquiry that people have tried to conduct about what the human condition is like. And I don't think people in humanities would think that either neuroscience or a behavioralistic criteria is going to do justice to the kinds of understandings of the human condition that that the great body of literature in humanity has actually got at.
Last question, this gentleman over here.
I think it's a very primitive question, and maybe it's what the whole conversation is about, so correct me, but I don't actually understand what you mean by consciousness. The word is going around a lot, but I know I'm supposed to understand that. I get that. I'm thinking, for instance, of Tolman's behavioral conception of consciousness, which is one, but he's very clear about what he means, which is nice about it. How would you know if an animal is conscious? So if you could just clarify, that word's been slung around a lot, and I really don't know what you're talking about.
I mean, part of the problem is nobody does. I mean, if we really did, in the way you might be asking for, we would probably have a science for it. In the sense, if I can give you a set of features that's going to pick out its essence in some way, so that we can start doing inductive generalization and science on it, we don't have that. That's what this is about, that we're arguing about exactly that. And so what we're doing is, like what we often do at the beginning, science ends in definitions, it doesn't start with definitions. When we encounter a phenomena, we often have to give it a preliminary description that picks it out, but doesn't give what you're asking for. It doesn't give a satisfactory description of it. I mean, that's how we started with matter, that's how we started with, all kinds of things. And who knows if we're going to get the answer to matter, even. I mean, so in one sense, I can't give you what you're asking for, but in another sense, I mean, I took it to be that there's a certain set of features that generally people want explained when they invoke the word consciousness, and I've been referring to them throughout, there's a perspectival aspect on the world, what it's like, as Jim was referencing, what it's like to have a certain kind of interaction with the world, all those sets of features. But they don't form a coherent, satisfactory definition. That's the problem.
And I can see that. Now, just to go back to Tolman, for him, say an animal is conscious when it's readjusting its orientations to things.
But lots of non-conscious things satisfy that definition.
But you've now invoked consciousness, and now I'm confused.
No, what I'm going to say is there'd be lots of creatures. Almost everybody would directly say that's a conscious being, right? And that might not clearly follow. And lots of things we say, like a steam governor on a steam engine is doing all kinds of adjustments, right? But that doesn't mean we think it's conscious of the steam engine or something like that.
That's true. Now I'm just thinking, you've got relevance and all that, but it's when the relevance is disturbed that you get some readjustment going on. I'm wondering
so one thing I use, I apologize to the 342 people here who've heard this, but one of the things that I ask is, what would have to be true if you built a machine or programmed a computer such that it would be unethical to unplug it? And two things about that. It's sort of a behavioral test, but a very different sense from what you were asking for. I think not only is there a sort of an intuition, I agree with what John said, I think there's a kind of shared intuition, which underlies, I think, a lot of descriptions of phenomenal consciousness and stuff. There isn't a clear definition and so on. But it's not an isolated predicate that floats free in society. It's very tied into some things. And I actually think that ethical normative questions are a pretty good route into it with respect to querying one's own sense of it. Because I think things like consciousness and so on, when is abortion become, it's not like black and white probably when it ceases to be ethical, but there's really serious issues there, and people really wrestle with this, and decisions are made every day, and the issue, would we even know if we built a machine such that with an ethical unplug it? This is something I think should vex Hinton.
Yes.
Because he's building these machines at a low level, but he doesn't actually have a sense, I think, of the levels of description of his systems at which we would likely want to talk about whether they're conscious or not, but then they unplug them. So I think ethics and normativity are good to not take off the table. I think they're very good guides into what's going on.
I want to say one more thing.
So yeah, but he can have.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, and the reference to Jeff Hemphren brings up a point. I mean, part of the problem also is that trying to give a definition, even a working definition of consciousness, gets you entangled with other notions that we also don't have a satisfactory final, like intelligence and representation and content, right? So that's part of the problem. That's why it'll keep philosophers occupied for a while. And I guess what we were trying to do here, which you might have found unsatisfactory, and I can appreciate that, we were trying to zero in on just one of the contentious things, namely the relationship between consciousness and representation.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Brian. And thank you, everyone. Now we have to clear out because there's a class coming right up.
Yeah, and I mean that was not only fun but useful.